Hello friends, today's subject is a bit off the wall. I recently looked at the Netflix show The Manhattan Alien Abduction and I was just gripped by it. And today in this video I want to talk about my own alien opinions and sort of mild experiences, and also to talk about this show. So I really urge you to go and look at this show if you haven't seen it already. I mean, if you haven't, then I'll break it down as clearly as I can, but you probably get more from it if you went and watched the production. Okay, if I go back to the time when I was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, shows like E.T., no, hang on, that was a bit later. Yeah, well, maybe Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., Space Odyssey, those sorts of films were coming out, and many others. People were really fascinated by ufology and aliens, and I remember as a little girl, I was very imaginative, and I would sometimes have bad dreams in which I woke up in my bedroom. In the dream I would wake up in my bedroom where I really was, and then a nightmare would unfold. I remember I had one very vivid dream that my sister had fallen out of the window of our bedroom in Glasgow. We lived in a flat in Maryhill, and in my dream my sister had fallen out of the window of our bedroom, which was at the top floor, and I woke up and I was hysterical. And even though I immediately saw my sister, my parents came and comforted me. It was so real. I couldn't, it was horrible. It was absolutely awful. And then another couple of times I woke up in the middle of the night in the same bedroom with my sister, and I had the clear feeling that there were alien figures in the room. There were about 3 or 4 of them, and they had the kind of alien shaped heads, and they looked like it was really true. And I don't remember whether I woke up my parents, but I was truly terrified. Now, I think these were dreams. I don't actually think there were aliens in my room. And I mean, even in the dream, they didn't speak to me. They didn't move or take anything from me. So if they'd really been aliens, I think they would have done more than just look at me. Now, it's interesting that a UFO researcher or someone who's very invested in that kind of thing would say, oh no, you saw aliens. That was your experience. You should lean into that. Let's explore that. And they would be very invested in looking at it from that point of view. And then other people, like my friends and really me, I would say, no, those weren't aliens. It was just a bad dream. And it was bad, but it was not true. So there you go. That's kind of my starting point. As a little girl, I was very imaginative. My friends were all very interested in the alien movies. And I think we did believe that it was true. And I still do think there are aliens out there. I'm very grateful I've not really seen them because it would be terrifying. But the subject of UFOs and ufology is, it's basically because there's no scientific data. There's nothing that you can reproduce in a laboratory. Any book about UFOs or accounts about UFOs are only going to be an interesting story. If I buy a book about this, for example, the Manhattan Alien Abduction or anything like Roswell, whatever, there's no actual evidence. I'm just buying an entertaining story. If I look at like a program like this Netflix story that I really enjoyed, it is an account. Now, I have to say that if you've watched this, you'll know what I mean. And again, I urge you, if you've not watched it, go and watch it before you see what I'm saying. It's about this, basically about this lady, Linda Napolitano, I think, yes. She maybe initially had a different name, but her name is Linda. And in 1989, she relates that she was abducted from her home and sort of beamed up into this spacecraft outside of her apartment in Manhattan. And the interesting thing about Linda's story is that there are about 20 witnesses who say that they saw it, or that they saw something very bizarre. Like one lady said she was an incredibly bright light outside of her window, and she was a New York native, and basically this light was unearthly, and she was too frightened to open the curtain. But it was that night, that day and time that she saw it. And then other people, like there was a man with a garbage truck, he saw the whole thing, and he saw somebody in a white dress being lifted up into the spaceship. And it is very compelling because why would all these people just have the same experience? Now, Linda's story, it became more and more complicated. Basically, some purportedly FBI people also saw her abduction, and started threatening her and became very intense. And at this point, Linda contacted Bud Hopkins, who was a leading UFO researcher. He's now passed away. He was also living in Manhattan, I believe. And he, with his wife, Carol Rainey, and they had written a book together about UFO abductions, which I've not read. I would like to read it. It would be interesting, but I've not read it. And he and Carol had an apartment in Manhattan in New York where people who had had alien abduction experiences can go and have a support group, can talk to Bud, and also have these hypnotic regressions, which to sort of verify or explore or find out if they have a patchy memory, what happened or what didn't happen. So if you look at the show, they explain it all more clearly than that. But basically the premise of the film is, on the one hand, there's Linda, who's now, an older lady, and whose life's kind of gone past, and she's still quite sure in her experience of being abducted and taken into the spaceship. And on the other side of the show's narrative is this lady, Carol Rainey, who was married to Bud, and who met Linda at the time when she first approached Bud and went to him to try and get some understanding of her experience of being abducted. And then all these people who'd witnessed the strange events and who had written to Bud, they basically, the whole thing coalesced when Linda went to Bud's apartment, and he spoke to her. He did a hypnotic regression. In fact, he did a number of hypnotic regressions about her experience, and it seemed that definitely she had been abducted by aliens. Now, I say definitely because, as I said, with all UFO-related things, there is no evidence. The tragedy of this experience is that it's always just what someone says. Now imagine if you really were abducted by aliens, how terrifying that would be. And it's compounded by the knowledge that really most people will say you're crazy or you're making it up, which must be even worse. So Linda found a lot of support by going to Bud's group and talking about her experiences. And Carol, Bud's then wife, they actually divorced, and I may add, Carol has now passed away too. She's no longer here, but I guess they filmed this obviously before she had passed away. Carol subsequently decided that Linda had lied, that it was all a hoax. And she subsequently wrote a very devastating essay called The Priests of High Strangeness, which I have read, and in which she accuses UFO investigators like her ex-husband Bud of being too credible and too willing to believe what they are being told by the abduction claimants, and that they cherry-pick what they're going to write about and leave out things that don't really suit the narrative or that are boring. And one really devastating account in the essay is about a completely different UFO investigator called David Jacobs, and his abuse of an abduction victim known as Emma Woods, which was a pseudonym, that was not her real name. Unfortunately, though, David Jacobs was a good friend of Bud's, and this does not speak well for Bud. I won't go into the Emma Woods case, but it does seem that Jacobs was very sexually creepy and abusive towards Emma. And if what the article says is true, he could not be called anything like a scientist or a scholar. If I had only read Carol's essay with no other information, I would have written off Bud and his fellow researchers completely. The essay goes on to explain that Bud refused any supervision or checks on his work, as did Jacobs, and they basically insisted that they continue to be free to just do their thing and have the power that they did have over vulnerable people. So Carol's essay was, I would say it was largely about other people than Linda. Linda's part is actually quite small, but the essay is devastating. However, having listened to Linda's account, I did believe her. And I felt that everything Carol said to try and discredit her, nothing finally did discredit her. Again, tragically, it was all just what one person said and what another person said. There were about 20 witnesses who contacted Bud with their accounts, and some of these people are in the movie, especially the man with the rubbish truck. And then there was another man who points out where he saw Linda's body floating above the sky. And to me, it just seems impossible that one fairly ordinary family. Linda's family do not look like very wealthy or very powerful people, could persuade or bribe all these 20 other people to make up these stories. It seems strange. And then another thing that kind of clinched Linda's case was that she had a strange kind of metal object in her nose. Apparently after she had her second child, she had pictures taken and she noticed she had a bump in her nose and she thought it was a tumour. So she went to the doctor and the doctor told her, "You've had nose surgery and someone's used a scalpel inside your nose." And then there was this little piece of metal inside her nose which was found in an x-ray. I do hope I'm explaining this all correctly. And Carol, for example, in her rebuttal just says, this could be a fake. You can get the same effect by having a bit of metal outside of your nose. In an x-ray, it can look the same. But she can't prove that that's true. The main thing that Carol has to say about Linda is she reports a telephone conversation allegedly that Bud had with Linda in which Linda pretended to be her cousin Connie. And basically, apparently they agreed that Linda had pretended and that she had basically been deceitful there. But there's no evidence this conversation ever took place. It could just be something that she said. So she accuses Linda of not having evidence, but she herself has no evidence for what she's saying. But the casualness with which she says this is awful. Okay. It does seem very compelling. I was very compelled by the man with the rubbish truck. I thought, I don't see what was in it for him to lie about this. Carol is she comes across like a very hard person to love. She was initially a filmmaker who made films about scientific subjects. She was a filmmaker who would make films about scientific subjects in hospitals. And she also says in her articles about the High Priestesses of Strangeness that you have to have a lot of scientific controls and evidence, and there has to be a high amount of ethics and supervision in a scientific story. And of course that's true, but because there is no scientific evidence for UFOs, when she went into this field, because she met her husband Bud, she moved in with him and was very excited to explore UFOs, well, none of that scientific evidence was going to be possible. She also says in the article that she feels that someone who's been abducted by aliens should quite easily be able to retrieve a spoon, a glass, or something with alien DNA on it for scientists to examine. I mean, are you kidding? You think if someone's been abducted into a spaceship, they're going to have the presence of mind to pinch a spoon or a plate or something? I mean, Carol, please. I really wish Carol was here so I could confront her with this, but I just felt she was so awful. This article that she wrote completely flattened Linda, or attempted to. Linda and the other people who had alien experiences came to Bud and Carol's house because it was a safe place where they could talk about their experiences and they could get some support and some comfort. And okay, it was imperfect. And I must say, it does look as if Bud did allow himself to be carried away by some things because he thought they'd make a good story. But the truth is, as I said, a UFO book is not scientific. It has to be entertaining or no one will buy it. I mean, it's slightly verging on show business. Having said that, I do believe Linda. I did believe that it was a true account. But someone like Bud Hopkins, they make their money by appearing on television, by writing books that will hopefully be bestsellers. There's no official recognition. In my opinion, governments know perfectly well what the truth is about UFOs. They don't need to pay people like Bud Hopkins to do a dispassionate analysis because they actually know what the truth is. They have all the information. I think they've spoken to aliens. They know what's happening and they keep it to themselves. And they just, they just don't need someone like Bud Hopkins to help them. So someone like Bud Hopkins is a person who's kind of a rogue trader. You know, he's doing his best. He has to make interesting material. But as I say again, I do believe Linda. But I felt that Carol was so unfair. I feel that when she married Bud, she loved him. Of course, it was very interesting. UFOs are interesting. It's a very seductive subject. But I do feel that she had an eye on her own career. She did go on, despite all these qualms she later had, to write a book with Bud about UFO experiences. And she edited another book, I think. She made a number of short films. But I think at some point she has decided that it's ultimately the big bit of clinching evidence, the big story isn't going to happen, and she's going to move on with her life and her career. And also, I felt she got very angry with Linda. I felt she says she felt Bud was becoming too familiar with Linda, although there's no evidence or suggestion. I didn't think that they had, they seemed to be involved with one another, but I think that made her extremely angry. I think she was very, very angry that Linda was being too familiar with her husband, that the two of them were becoming too much of a team. And she just decided ultimately that I felt she was angry and she was getting revenge on Linda. Because my goodness, that essay, if you read it, it's just devastating. I mean, I felt Carol took her higher education and her camera equipment and she bullied Linda because there's no coming back from what Carol said. The more Linda would try to explain or write an article of her own, the more it looks like she's hiding something or that she's making it up. It just struck me, to me, the story was partly about the difficulties of remaining dignified when you've had a horrific experience that other people can't understand and that they will just dismiss. I mean, how many people who've been sexually molested or raped, children even, are just told it didn't happen. This experience didn't happen because that's simpler. If someone was never victimized, we don't have to do anything about it. We don't have to help them. We don't have to give them any compensation money or any support. We can just go on with making our meals, watching TV, and having our ordinary life. So it's just an easy response. And I felt, it was awful. Carol was a hard person to love. As a Christian, I should love everybody. I just found her so cruel. And in the film, when she saw Linda, she was actually trembling. I think she was aware as her own life came to an end of how ruthless she'd been to make all these films about Linda, to help with the book, and to then just trash her and say she'd been lying. It is a really powerful story and taught me a lot. In fact, I actually got quite scared of relating how I'd had these UFO dreams when I was a little girl, because I thought people might say that I saw aliens, and I don't think I did. But that was my rather rambling take on the UFO alien experience. And I really hope one day that I will get to go to a UFO conference because I am interested in it. I do feel that people like Hopkins and Abrams, they are scary. I mean, you do have to be ethical, of course. One very sad thing Carol disclosed in the article, which maybe was true, was she said when people came to Bud with a UFO story that he didn't find exceptional, that it was just a standard account of what these aliens do. He would take their evidence, do a regression with them, and take their information, but then he would never speak to them again. They would sometimes call up increasingly distressed because they wanted some more support, some more feedback from him, and he would not respond. That is disappointing. That is a shame. Oh yes, and another thing that Carol sort of tried to undermine was the fact that the main source of evidence for alien abductions is hypnotic regression. But she also said, in the film, that when she came to Manhattan to live with Bud and make her life with him, that he did a hypnotic regression with her. And in her situation, there was no contact with aliens. She had never had an alien experience, but he did regress her back to very traumatic experiences she had had as a child growing up in a cult called the Plymouth Brethren. She wouldn't actually elaborate on her experiences, but they were very painful. So she kept her own privacy there. She didn't want to put out her own humiliating experiences, whatever they were. She actually was she grew up in the Plymouth Brethren, but Carol had increasing numbers of questions about them and their beliefs. They're very, very fundamentalist. They completely block out anyone who's not a believer. And she eventually was expelled from the cult by her own father. And she had no contact anymore with her own family, which must have been absolutely devastating. But what I'm getting at is she herself was hypnotically regressed. She did have memories that were true and very painful that her husband Bud did uncover. And yet she then undermined the validity of the other people who'd been regressed. She said that Linda didn't sound right, that she didn't believe Linda was being regressed. But then again, that's just her opinion. There's no definite evidence, which is the tragedy of people who have a weird experience or who have a very traumatic experience that is out with most people's understanding and knowledge. If you've ever looked at the Arthur C. Clarke's World of Strange Powers, in fact, he did a number of series, but I have the complete Arthur Clarke box set. And he interviews a number of people actually in Scotland who did have alien experiences. In one of them, there was a man who had a huge kind of whirling spaceship come towards him, which damaged his trousers. And the police were called by his wife afterwards because he was in shock. And the police were interviewed, and they had these trousers that were in his. They had taken them into evidence, and they said, well, he's an upstanding member of the community. We've got no reason to disbelieve what he said. And that's all they could do about it. They could not, there was nothing they could do to help him. But wasn't it nice that they didn't sort of ridicule him or say anything nasty? They just said, well, that's what he said, and we've got no reason to think he's lying. Maybe that's the best sort of response to people in this awful situation of alien abduction. Another thing that if you look at the High Priestess's article, the main subjects that Carol does discuss are this lady Emma Woods with her awful experience with this man Abrams, though to be fair, I've not actually looked into it, but it sounds dreadful. And also a man called Jim Mortellaro, who became another very infamous alien abduction case. And apparently he came to Carol and Bud's house and was regressed, and they noticed he had a gun in his boot. And from what Carol, she takes a lot of time to discuss this man, Jim, and why he seems to be someone who had mental health issues and was a kind of attention seeker. But then again, if you're an alien investigator, as I say, there's no officialdom, there are no checks and balances. You're going to have some people coming to you who are in genuine distress, who have genuinely met an alien or believe that they did, which is, well, what's worse? I don't know. If you genuinely believe something, you will also have people who are attention seekers. You will have people who have mental health issues. All of those things are going to come to your door. That's a part of your life as someone who's in this very out there field. So those Emma Woods and Jim Mortellaro are the main subjects of her essay. Linda is mentioned very briefly, but as I say, it is devastating. She simply refers to her as being a liar. And, with her background, with Carol's background of working in educational films and being a person with a certain standing, it's just devastating. I really feel for Linda and her family. To be dismissed like that, with no chance to come back, that must have been awful. Very, very hard to be dignified in that situation. And also, Linda's husband has stood by her all these years. Another awful aspect of the case is that eventually Linda says her own family were also targeted by the aliens and were also taken to the spaceship, and that she came into the living room one night and all her two sons and her husband all had nosebleeds from their right nostril, which apparently is in alienology experiences. These aliens often put some sort of probe or something into your right nostril, and they all were bleeding, and her sons were devastated. Her son was interviewed, but keeping his face dark, and I didn't blame him because he has a life to lead. It's very difficult. I mean, if you are someone in that situation, what do? You go and get help, or you keep it all bottled up. You could go to see a psychotherapist, psychologist, but those people charge a lot of money for their time. And if they don't believe you, then where do you go? It's a very, very complicated situation. And, I wonder what it would be like if aliens did actually show themselves. If governments decided that they were going to be open about what happened and about what the truth is that's out there. It would be terrifying. I mean, my whole belief system would be really kind of unraveled, because, my belief of what's there and the laws and what are the parameters of our world. For example, my belief in God, in Jesus. The aliens would have something to say about all that. And, That's scary. So yes, that is my somewhat rambling beliefs, but I must say the Manhattan Alien Abductions is a fascinating program, and you should go and see it. And Linda, if you ever watch this, I feel for you, I believe you, and it's very hard for you to win in this situation, but I hope that eventually you do. And, thank you for being truthful and for speaking about your situation, which sounds absolutely awful. Yeah. Okay. I'm very glad that there are no aliens in my house. Thank you for tuning in today. So thank you for tuning in today. I hope I've presented that well, and I will see you on my next film. Don't know what it's going to be about, but there will be one soon. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. There are aliens in my house. Cookie, we've got aliens in the house. They're all grouped here on my little Japanese console table. Oh wow, I hope they're friendly and they come in peace.